It was 14:15 on a gray Saturday when I sat at a little table in the corner of Morrison's books, staring at the neat stack of novels I had poured 3 years of my life into. Outside, the drizzle tapped softly against the window, as if the sky itself had decided to match my mood. Inside, the chairs sat empty, save for a couple of strangers who had wandered in only because they heard there was free coffee and cookies. I told myself not to check my phone again, but of course I did. There were no new messages. "No, we're on our way." "Mom?" "No, don't worry. We'll be there soon." Just silence. Ethan had chosen Brooks Vineyard Retreat. Maya had followed along because she didn't want to be the odd one out. My 3 grandchildren, Ava, Noah, and little Grace, were photographed in fluffy robes, smiling with their favorite grandmother at a wine country spa. I knew because Brooke had posted it online for everyone to see. Favorite grandmother. The words cut sharper than anything else. I sat there, clutching my pen, forcing a polite smile for the one kind stranger who bought a copy out of pity. My children were alive, well, and laughing somewhere else, while the woman who had raised them alone after their father left sat invisible at her own book launch. The bookstore owner tried to be kind, filling my glass of water, saying smaller events were sometimes more meaningful, but meaningful to whom? To the young man who asked if I knew where the bathroom was, to the older lady who wondered if my book came in large print. My story, my life's work, meant nothing to the people whose presence mattered most. By the time I packed up, I wasn't just carrying boxes of unsold books. I was carrying a truth I could no longer ignore. For years, I had been showing up, always dependable, always giving. But here, in the quiet humiliation of an empty bookstore, I finally saw what kindness had been hiding. I had been invisible to the very people I lived for. And invisibility, once recognized, cannot be unseen. Tomorrow, I would begin accounting for all the ways I had made myself small for others. And for the first time, I would ask what it had cost me. The next morning at 09:20, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, staring at the legal pad in front of me. Old habits die hard. I'd been a teacher for decades, and when life felt too heavy, I wrote things down. This morning, it wasn't lesson plans or to-do lists. It was a reckoning. I thought about the years I spent raising Ethan and Maya after their father walked away, leaving me to hold everything together. I worked double shifts, grading essays late into the night, tutoring on weekends just to make ends meet. I paid every tuition bill, every car repair, every last-minute need. When Ethan needed help with his down payment, I gave it without hesitation. When Maya's wedding costs ran higher than expected, I covered the difference with a smile. And then came the babysitting years. Hundreds of hours, maybe thousands, spent rocking Ava to sleep, chasing Noah around the yard, teaching Grace to read before kindergarten. I never asked for payment, never even asked for thanks. I told myself that love was enough. But love, I'm learning, can be one-sided when you train people to believe you'll always show up, no matter what. That lesson hit harder when I scrolled through my phone again and saw Brooke's post from yesterday. My grandchildren in matching robes, their faces glowing with laughter, standing beside the woman she proudly called their favorite grandmother. It was like a punch in the gut. Not their only grandmother, just their favorite. And I wasn't even an afterthought. I sat there with pen in hand, writing out the numbers, the sacrifices, the years of giving without question. The total wasn't just financial. It was emotional, physical, and spiritual. A lifetime of showing up. And in return, invisibility. The irony is, I taught them this. I taught them I'd always be available, always dependable, always willing to put myself last. I raised them to believe my love required no effort in return. But yesterday's humiliation stripped away every excuse I've made for them. I finally see the truth. And starting now, the rules are going to change. By Monday morning at 09:00, I was walking into my lawyer's office with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The last time I sat across from him, I was a desperate woman navigating divorce. This time, I wasn't desperate. I was decisive. I slid the folder across his desk, and for the first time in decades, I didn't ask what was fair for everyone else. I asked what was right for me. My current will left everything split evenly between Ethan and Maya. But fairness has to be earned, not just inherited. I instructed him to change it. Each of them would receive $10,000, enough to be generous, but no longer enough to sustain their careless expectations. The bulk of my estate, I redirected with intention. For my grandchildren, I established 3 trusts of $75,000 each, but with conditions attached. If Ava, Noah, and Grace want access to their funds, they'll have to build a real relationship with me, not forced holidays or obligatory visits, but genuine connection. Phone calls, letters, showing up. If they can't do that, then the money will go to literacy programs instead. Love, after all, is not something that should be conditional, but it should be reciprocal. At 11:00, I met with the bank's trust officer. The marble floors and polished wood felt intimidating, but I spoke with calm authority. We set everything up, down to the smallest detail. I wanted no loopholes, no excuses, no way for anyone to twist my intentions. By 14:00, I was at my financial advisor's office. I directed him to begin annual gifts to my sister Joan, the one person who has been steady, loving, and supportive all along. Year after year. She called, remembered birthdays, asked about my book. She deserves far more than the children who couldn't be bothered to show up when it mattered. I also added donations to the public library, the local animal shelter, and the Food Network. Before I left, I requested something unusual, a formal statement of mental competency, signed and sealed. Because I know the protests are coming. They will call me bitter, unstable, maybe even unwell. But no, I am not angry. I am awake. And once you wake up, there's no going back to sleep. The first wave came the next morning, buzzing on my phone before I'd even finished making breakfast. Missed calls, voicemails piling up. Ethan, Maya, even Brooke, all wanting to know why I wasn't answering. It struck me how unusual it must have seemed for me to go silent. For decades, I had been their constant emergency line, their always available resource. The moment I stopped, they assumed something was wrong. But nothing was wrong. For the first time in years, everything felt right. I scrambled eggs, buttered toast, and sat down to eat slowly, savoring each bite without rushing to anyone else's schedule. It was startling how foreign it felt to take my time. By mid-morning, I'd signed up for a writing workshop at the community college. The woman at the desk lit up when I told her I had just published a novel. Her interest was genuine, and it caught me off guard. For years, I had been overlooked in my own family. Yet here was a stranger making me feel seen. Later, Ethan showed up at my door, his face tight with concern. He asked what was going on, why I was pulling away. Instead of answering directly, I asked him a simple question. What's my favorite color? He hesitated. I pressed further. What are my hobbies? What kind of movies do I enjoy? His silence told me more than his words ever could. My own son didn't know me beyond the role of mom. To him, I had been function, not person. That evening, I heard from a neighbor that my children were considering calling the police for a wellness check. Imagine that, setting boundaries mistaken for a breakdown. It might have been insulting if it weren't so revealing. The old me would have rushed to reassure them, to apologize for worrying anyone. The new me simply made lunch, turned off my phone, and sat at my desk to write. And in that quiet, I felt lighter. For the first time in years, my silence wasn't emptiness, it was freedom. Something deep inside told me that this was only the beginning. By Wednesday morning, my phone was relentless. 18 missed calls before I'd even poured my coffee. The messages sounded different now, less angry, more panicked. Something had shifted. Finally, Ethan insisted I come over, against my better judgment. I drove to his house. When I stepped inside, the air felt heavy, like the pause before a storm. On the coffee table lay a manila envelope with my name written in Daniel's familiar hand. My breath caught. I hadn't seen that handwriting in years. Inside were bank statements, insurance policies, and one letter. I unfolded it slowly, my hands trembling. Daniel's words spilled across the page: regret for leaving us, sorrow for his selfishness, acknowledgement that I had carried the family alone. He admitted what my children never had, that I had been the strong one, the steady one, the one who never faltered. He left behind $84,700 in investments and life insurance, but the money came with a plea. He asked me not to hand it over unless Ethan and Maya showed me the love and respect I deserved. Not gestures born from guilt, but consistent, genuine presence. As I read, the room grew silent. Ethan stared, pale, while Maya's eyes filled with tears. Brooke sat stiff, calculating, her expression giving away what she was really thinking. For me, the shock wasn't just in the money, it was in the validation. After years of invisibility, here was a man who had abandoned me, yet still recognized my worth more clearly than my living children ever had. I folded the letter and set it back in the envelope. My voice was calm, steadier than I felt inside. This money changes nothing, I told myself. It doesn't erase the years of being overlooked. What it does give me is proof. Proof that even Daniel, flawed as he was, saw me. I looked at my children, shaken and silent, and told them simply to go home and think. Not about the money, but about the kind of relationship they truly wanted with me while I was still here to choose. There was one truth I had kept buried beneath all the noise. A truth heavier than wills or inheritances. 3 months ago, a doctor sat across from me with that look in his eyes, the one that tells you before the words even come. Stage 3 pancreatic cancer. I tried chemotherapy, 2 rounds, but the side effects stripped me of more than the disease itself. I chose quality over quantity. 6 months if I was lucky. 3 if I wasn't. I hadn't told Ethan or Maya. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed to know who they really were before I handed them my goodbye. I couldn't bear the thought of their sudden affection being born out of pity, not love. The only person I confided in was Joan. My sister heard it first. Her tears came fast, but she didn't smother me in them. She asked what I needed, not what she needed to feel useful. She promised to be my sister, not my nurse, and that was exactly what I needed most. On Sunday afternoon, I finally gathered Ethan and Maya in my living room. No spouses, no grandchildren, no distractions, just us. They looked at me with suspicion and fear, waiting for another financial blow. What I gave them instead was the truth. I told them I was sick, that my book launch wasn't just about the novel, it was supposed to be my farewell, that while they were at a vineyard spa with their favorite grandmother, I was sitting alone in a bookstore, quietly saying goodbye. Their faces fell, shock dissolving into tears, but I didn't soften the edges for them. I told them I had stopped chasing their love, that for decades I had made myself small, available, invisible, that I couldn't carry that role into my final months. I asked them one simple thing. When was the last time you called me just to ask how I was, not to request babysitting, not to borrow money, just to hear my voice? The silence that followed was louder than any argument, and in that silence, the truth stood naked between us. You didn't ask. After the truth came out, the atmosphere around me shifted almost overnight. Suddenly, my phone was no longer silent. Maya started dropping by with homemade soup, the kind she knew I liked but had never taken the time to make before. Ethan insisted on driving me to every doctor's appointment, even when I told him I could manage. Brooke sent flowers, though I suspected they were more for appearances than love. The grandchildren drew cards with crayon hearts and shaky stick figures, taping them proudly on my refrigerator as if it were their new job to remind me I mattered. I watched all of it with a cautious heart. Was this guilt masquerading as love? Or was something deeper beginning to take root at night? When the house finally grew quiet, I would sit with their offerings scattered around me and wonder, did it really take cancer for them to remember? I was more than a convenience. And then came the appointment that none of us expected. The scans lit up the screen in a way that made the doctor's eyebrows rise. The tumor had shrunk 60% gone. He called it remarkable, almost unheard of at my stage. Instead of months, I might have years. I sat there in stunned silence, Ethan gripping my hand tighter than he had since he was a little boy. Maya's tears falling freely. I couldn't tell if they were tears of relief or of shame. For me, it was both miracle and complication. I had braced myself for the end, made peace with leaving, rearranged my life, my money, my expectations, and now, more time. What do you do when the farewell you've been rehearsing is suddenly postponed? How do you live when you've already stripped your life down to the essentials? Spoken truths that can't be unsaid, drawn lines that can't be erased. As I left the clinic, the autumn air felt sharper, brighter, each breath a conscious act of renewal. On the drive home, with Ethan quiet in the driver's seat, I watched the world outside the window with new eyes, the fiery orange of a maple tree, the laugh lines on a woman waiting for the bus, the simple, mundane beauty of a life I had been preparing to leave behind. It was all suddenly overwhelming. I should have felt a tidal wave of pure gratitude, and I did. But that gratitude was braided with a cold thread of confusion, even fear. I had already said my goodbyes in my heart. I had arranged my emotional furniture for a departure. And now, the guest of honor had been told the party was postponed indefinitely. Survival isn't just about living longer, it's about deciding what to do with the time you didn't expect to have. It's about not letting the reprieve become a relapse into old habits. The fear was a quiet whisper. What if their attention fades with the urgency? What if I am expected to become the convenient, invisible woman I once was? And that, I realized, was a question only I could answer through my actions, not just my words. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a rhythm I had never imagined possible. Ethan and Maya began showing up with a quiet steadiness that felt more genuine than any frantic rush of guilt. Sunday dinners became our new tradition. They weren't the elaborate, stressful affairs of holidays past, but simple meals filled with a new kind of conversation. One evening, over a roast chicken, Ethan asked me about my father, a man he barely knew. What was he like, Mom, before? Everything. I spent an hour telling stories, sharing memories I thought had been buried forever, and he listened with an intensity that made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in decades. The grandchildren started calling me during the week, not because their parents prompted them, but because they wanted to. Noah called, breathless with excitement, to tell me he'd won his debate tournament. I used that trick you taught me about taking a deep breath before my closing argument, he said. It worked. For the first time in years, I felt like a cherished member of a family, not just the safety net stretched beneath it. And yet, I kept the will exactly as I had written it. After one of those Sunday dinners, as we were clearing the plates, I told them, I want you both to know, I began, my voice steady. I haven't made any changes to my will. Everything remains as it is. I watched their faces, expecting a flicker of disappointment, but there was none. Ethan met my gaze directly. Good, he said softly. We don't want you to. It's honest. It reminds us that your love isn't a given. It's a gift we have to earn. It's not about the money. Mom, it's about earning back your trust. That honesty became the foundation we were rebuilding on. They didn't just show up with gifts or grand gestures anymore. They showed up with presence. They asked about my poetry workshop, read the first few pages of my new manuscript, and remembered to ask how my sister Joan was doing. They showed a genuine curiosity about the woman they had forgotten to see beyond the role of mom. I realized that sometimes love doesn't need a second chance. It just needs a clear, unwavering reminder of what it looks like. I often think back to that empty bookstore, the drizzle on the windows, the sting of humiliation that cracked me open. I thought then that the best revenge would be cutting people out, proving I could live without them. But I've learned something gentler and far more powerful. The real work wasn't in rewriting my will. It was in rewriting my own rules of engagement. Teaching them how to love me meant showing them my boundaries, sharing my passions, and letting them see my flaws. It meant allowing them the grace to try, to fail, and to try again. The best revenge isn't a bitter victory. It's giving people you love the chance to rise to the occasion and become the best version of themselves. So I live differently now. My mornings are quieter, my choices are mine, and the time I have, whether months or years, feels fuller than it ever has. I've started writing again, but this time, it's not from a need to be seen, but for the simple joy of telling a story. The empty chair that once sat across from me is no longer a symbol of absence, but an invitation for anyone who genuinely wishes to listen. And if you're reading my story, maybe you've felt invisible too. Maybe you have given more than you have received, pouring yourself into cups that were never meant to hold you. I hope you'll take this with you. Your worth doesn't disappear just because others fail to see it. It is not a reflection in their eyes, but a fire in your own soul. You do not have to burn down your world to be seen. Sometimes, you only need to choose to be warm for yourself. If this touched you, share it. Leave a comment. Tell me your story, because your voice and the life it represents matters too.